I probably should have called this talk tonight something like, "Is this for real?" Because when I first started introducing this subject to people, the reaction was, "Oh, don't be so stupid, they're not going to do anything like that." And I said, well, believe it or not, that's exactly what they want you to think. And I had one of these conversations, and the next day I was doing some research and I pulled up a document from the National Health Federation. And you're going to hear about this organization during the course of my talk tonight. And the opening paragraph here, it says, "Never heard of Codex? That's exactly what they want." The pharmaceutical industry fundamentally is about 80 years old. 80 years old. And then look, on the other side, this is a book that's just been published by William Engdahl. It's called Seeds of Destruction: The Hidden Agenda of Genetic Manipulation. And I'm just going to read you a review. It's a review written by a friend of mine in Canada. Because this book is hot off the press, so I haven't read it myself. But his review, he says, "This skillfully researched book focuses on how a small socio-political American elite seeks to establish control over the very basics of human survival. The provision of our daily bread. Control the food and you control the people." Hitler's primary financial backers were the pharmaceutical industry, IG Farben, which was effectively the conglomerate of the three major German pharmaceutical companies, which is Herbst, Bayer and BASF. The CEOs of those companies were charged at Nuremberg and were convicted of war crimes. Most people think of Auschwitz as a concentration camp. What most people don't know is that Auschwitz was the largest work camp ever known. It was 5 miles by 2, so it was like 10 square miles. It was 10 square miles. That was a work camp. Farben were using these people as slave labor, but also, more importantly, more significantly, as tests, as human guinea pigs. And the CEOs were jailed after the war. But within 10 years, two of the senior players in IG Farben were back at the helm of two of the major German pharmaceutical companies, Herbst and BASF. Shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that the pharmaceutical industry is the most significant financial backer of the Bush regime. After the Second World War, this is what the map of Europe would have looked like. Well, 27 different nations represented there, all responsible for their own, effectively, internal policy, philosophy, lifestyle. But of course, since 1957 and the establishment of the Club of Rome, which was initially an economic cooperation or economic cooperative organization, but it has grown into a 27-nation superstate. And right now, a governor of a state in the US has more power, more autonomy, than a prime minister of a European nation. There is more federal law in Europe than there is in the US. And Europe as a federation has been around for exactly 51 years, and there is more federal legislation than the US, which has been around for 231. But this is only the start of things to come, because whilst Europe has been coming together as a superstate, this has been happening in other areas of the world. We have the League of African Nations, the League of Arab Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Community, the Southeast Asia Economic Community, and the one that's coming really fast down the track is the North American Union. This is so imminent, it's being brought about by the collapse of the dollar. The next step is going to be the merger of the American Union with the EU, making it the most powerful economic bloc, obviously, in the world. It will be totally dominant economically, and it will very quickly swallow up all the other trade communities, all under the banner of the United Nations. The symbolism of the United Nations flag is very significant. This very aggressive looking symbol underneath it. Anybody recognize that symbol? The World Bank. The World Bank. There's a very common denominator between all the countries that are classified as the axis of evil. This Bush term. And it's the countries like Cuba, North Korea, Iran, recently Russia. Anybody wondered why Russia has been demonized in the media basically for the last 6 months? Well, all of these countries, and Venezuela of course, and an increasing number of Latin American countries as Venezuela and Chavez starts to find ways to help these guys out of their debt to the World Bank. These guys, all of these countries that are part of the axis of evil are free of debt. And Russia paid off its last installment for all the billions that it borrowed after the collapse of the Soviet bloc back in 1990. The World Bank has a couple of henchmen to carry out its will, and that is the World Trade Organization, which has been around since 1995, and the World Health Organization. Now these two organizations are complete misnomers, because let me assure you that the World Trade Organization has nothing really to do with world trade, and the World Health Organization definitely has nothing to do with health. But basically any country that is signed up to membership of the World Trade Organization is effectively under the auspices of the UN. So anything that the World Trade Organization deems to be law, the member countries have to abide by. And I'll give you one example that you won't be aware of. The World Trade Organization have deemed it quite legitimate for the US to export its hormone-impregnated beef. And it sees no reason why any nation, certainly any member nation, should reject the importation of contaminated beef, i.e. contaminated with the growth hormone. The EU at the moment refuses to import the American beef, so the EU has to pay a fine to the World Trade Organization of 150 million euros a year because we don't want their contaminated beef. Oh, sorry, the most powerful commissioner of the EU is the Trade Commissioner, and of course you know who that is. You know, the most honest British politician. Know who's been promised the presidency? Why do you think he has to convert to Catholicism? There's no way a Protestant can be president of the EU. The EU is a Catholic entity. It's not called the Club of Rome for nothing. So Tony, to become EU president, has to convert to Catholicism. And we may have seen the last elections where it's possible to include in your manifesto any nationalistic policy. Because under the EU constitution, it will be illegal for any political party to campaign or have within its manifesto any nationalistic ambitions. In the US alone, there are over 106,000 deaths every year, and catch this next bit, from properly prescribed medicines, taken exactly as directed. From properly prescribed medicines. I mean, I tell you, this has opened up a whole new avenue of research for me. And there's one particular book that I came across. It's called Corporate Crime in the Pharmaceutical Industry. And look at this. Another 150,000 people will die every year as a result of other medical blunders, making deaths caused by doctors one of the leading causes, some would say the leading cause of death in the USA. And just to put this in perspective, in 2002, the top 10 pharmaceutical companies earned more in profits than the rest of the 490 companies in the Fortune 500 put together. And the reason I'm using 2002 is because that changed in 2003 with the oil industry deciding to get a piece of the action. But this is the magnitude of the profitability. Any idea how many people die from terrorism? None. Big fat zero. And yet we have a war on terror. But, you know, basically, fundamentally, what's killing people is not terror. It's the pharmaceutical industry. You know, if somebody says to you, oh, organic food, we're still going to have access to organic food in 2010, they're probably right. They're probably right. But if somebody says, oh, we're still going to have organic food in 2020, Right now I would say they're probably wrong. Because this is the process of gradualism, and what the Codex committees do, because they're under phenomenal pressure from the pharmaceutical companies and the likes of Monsanto, they do it through gradualism. So it's little by little, push a little. And the way the pharmaceutical companies work and the way the food companies work is what they're trying to do with the Codex committees is make the testing process so outrageous and outrageously expensive that the only people that can afford to get things on the approved lists will be the Monsantos and the pharmaceutical companies. Nobody else will be able to afford to go through the rigorous tests that you have to go through to get a product onto the approved list. Because the EU issues two things, directives and regulation. And if they issue a regulation, basically that is law. If they issue a directive, what they're saying is, look, okay, it doesn't have to be law right now. We're going to let you go through the charade of making it look like you're making the decision. But you have to actually implement the legislation. All the privatization that's going on, it's not this government making the decision to privatize the industries. It's like the German government's not making the decision to privatize the Dutch railway system, or the French making the decision. It's EU directive that's coming down the chain. So Codex Alimentarius, I mean, this is basically the equation. Unlabeled GM processed foods, which of course means low nutrients, low minerals, low vitamin values. All vitamin and mineral supplements to be of low dosage, i.e. ineffectual. And herbs and other natural health remedies to be classified as drugs. Strictly prohibit information about diseases being treatable by nutrients. Strictly prohibit. It is fundamentally illegal for a doctor to advise a patient that their condition may improve if they change their diet. This is outrageous.